You expect history's greatest figures to leave us with some final, profound wisdom. We anticipate epiphanies, grand farewells, or noble pronouncements that neatly summarize a life of consequence. We seek a philosophical closing statement, a lesson learned, a legacy defined. The collective human imagination has been conditioned by centuries of literature and drama to demand a dignified exit, a final, eloquent speech delivered just before the curtain falls. Number 1. James French, The Ultimate Punchline. Let's begin our journey in the grim, sterile setting of Oklahoma State Penitentiary in 1966. The air was thick with the scent of ozone and the tension of absolute finality. Convicted murderer James French, a man whose life had culminated in the cold realization of a death sentence, was being led to the electric chair. In these final moments, most people are consumed by a maelstrom of fear, regret, or desperate prayers. The standard protocol for such an execution was designed to allow the condemned one final chance at repentance or a message of closure. James French, however, was consumed by a far different impulse, an opportunity for the darkest, most calculated punchline in history. As the required reporters watched, their pens poised to record any sign of contrition or despair, French coolly turned to one of them. He adjusted his stance, looked directly into the camera of the press gallery, and delivered his masterpiece with chilling composure. "How's this for a headline for tomorrow's paper? French fries." The sheer, calculated audacity of the statement is mind-blowing. In his last conscious act on Earth, facing the mechanical jaws of the device designed to incinerate him, he chose not to seek peace, but to deliver a perfect, morbid pun. The genius of the line lay in its triple entendre. It linked his name, his method of execution, the electric chair, or frying, and a common fast food side dish. French seized control of his own death narrative. He ensured that he would not be remembered as just another forgotten criminal or a terrified victim, but as a wisecracking villain who faced oblivion with a terrifying sense of theatrical detachment. He became a legend of gallows humor, defining his own final exit with a stunning display of narcissistic control. Number 2. Oscar Wilde, The Aesthetic Battle. Now we shift dramatically from a sterile American prison to a depressing Parisian hotel room in 1900. This was the final, squalid stage for the legendary writer and wit Oscar Wilde. His life had been a dazzling ascent and a catastrophic fall from grace. Exiled from his beloved London society following a devastating scandal and subsequent imprisonment, he lay dying, utterly bankrupt and stripped of his former glory. His final days were spent in poverty and neglect, a cruel, ironic joke for a man who famously worshipped beauty above all else. He was attended by a few loyal friends in the Hotel d'Alsace, a place whose drabness perfectly mirrored his diminished circumstances. His physical surroundings were an offense to his very soul. The room was papered with hideously tacky, loud floral patterns that screamed of vulgarity and bad taste. Even while succumbing to the ravages of meningitis and the final indignities of a ruined life, Wilde proved that his spirit, his wit, and his uncompromising aesthetic standards were utterly unbroken. Surveying the gaudy, clashing colors and patterns that polluted his last view, he summoned his final, magnificent critique, a definitive statement of his life's priorities. "Either that wallpaper goes, or I do." He died shortly thereafter. The irony is poignant and perfect. It wasn't about God or the afterlife. It was about aesthetics. His primary concern in the face of death was the sheer offense of bad design. It was the most fittingly dramatic, hilariously snobbish exit imaginable for the man who famously quipped, "I have nothing to declare except my genius." Wilde went out not with a prayer, but with a magnificent, final, and necessary condemnation of ugliness, forever cementing his image as the uncompromising dandy who prioritized style over survival. Number 3. James Tybridge, The Absurdist's Exit. If you thought Oscar Wilde's dedication to interior design was odd, this next entry completely derails the entire train of logical thought. In 1996, convicted murderer James Tybridge was facing execution via lethal injection in the state of Virginia. The ritual of the final statement is designed to give the condemned a moment of humanity, a chance to communicate before the final darkness. Tybridge's statement began, as you might expect, with a touching and solemn message to his loved ones, injecting a moment of genuine human feeling into the horrific formality of the death chamber. He said, "I love my family," a moment of heartfelt connection before the end. And then, without any warning, context, or conceivable explanation, he concluded his official final statement with a single, baffling, agrarian word: potato. That was it. The silence that followed must have been immense, stretching the moment into an eternity of bewilderment. No follow-up, no clarification, no hidden meaning that anyone could decipher in the moments or years that followed. Just potato. It has since become a legend of weird, unexplained history. Was it a secret code to a forgotten accomplice? A sudden, profound, and absurd memory from childhood? A complete short circuit of the brain under the unbearable, extreme stress of impending execution? We will never know the truth behind the final potato. And that unknowability is precisely what makes it a masterpiece of historical absurdity, leaving everyone who reads the account to forever wonder about the final, baffling relevance of the humble tuber in James Tybridge's final thoughts. It is a monument to the fact that, in the face of death, the human mind is capable of generating pure, unadulterated nonsense.
Number 4. Dylan Thomas, The Drunken Scorecard. Dylan Thomas was the rock star poet of his generation, a Welsh wordsmith whose voice could mesmerize and whose lyrical genius was undeniable. His life, however, was as chaotic and self-destructive as his poetry was brilliant. It was a maelstrom of artistic creation and a relentless, colossal appetite for alcohol, a legendarily heavy drinker whose binges became the stuff of notoriety. It is tragically, yet perfectly on brand that his final words weren't a line of majestic verse or a profound reflection on the beauty he wrought, but a final, boastful scorecard. After a colossal marathon drinking session at the infamous White Horse Tavern in New York City in 1953, he somehow managed to stumble back to his nearby hotel room. The man had consumed enough liquor to fell a small horse. Proudly, and with a slurred finality, he announced to his assistant the staggering tally of his performance. "I've had 18 straight whiskeys. I think that's the record." Shortly after this boast, he collapsed into a fatal coma, never to recover. He didn't rage against the dying of the light, as he urged in his most famous poem. He didn't contemplate his genius or the legacy of his powerful words. He bragged about his high score in the tragic game of drinking himself to death. It is a grimly perfect, self-authored epitaph for a tortured genius, a raw, honest admission that even on the precipice of death, his central identity was tied to his wild, destructive capacity. Number 5. King George V, The Magnificent Grump. King George V was the stoic, nonsense monarch of the British Empire, a man who reigned during the colossal upheaval of World War I. He was not known for his sunny disposition, instead cultivating a reputation for stern duty and formidable formality. As he lay on his deathbed in 1936, frail and succumbing to chronic illness, his physicians and family tried to offer him what they hoped was a comforting palliative thought. They gently suggested that soon he might be well enough to recuperate in his beloved, if slightly mundane, seaside resort of Bognor Regis. The king, hearing this prospect of forced cheerfulness and vacation small talk, summoned his last bit of energy not for a final word of wisdom to his heir, but for a magnificent burst of pure, unadulterated crankiness. He reportedly growled a phrase that has become one of history's greatest displays of royal peevishness: "Bugger Bognor." And then, having delivered his definitive opinion on the matter of seaside resorts, he promptly expired. It's a moment so wonderfully, incredibly human. In his final moments, faced with the prospect of having to discuss his health and a cheerful seaside convalescence, the king simply couldn't be bothered. He chose to go out on a note of magnificent, honest, aristocratic grumpiness. He remains an icon for curmudgeons everywhere, proving that even a king's last stand can be against the tyranny of forced optimism. Number 7. Dr. William Palmer, The Question of Safety. Our journey through bizarre exits takes us next to the dark heart of Victorian England, where respectability often masked monstrous deeds. Dr. William Palmer, a respected physician in the 19th century, maintained a life of outward decorum, yet harbored a nasty hobby: systematically poisoning people for their insurance money. He was known as the Rudgley Poisoner, suspected of killing at least 14 individuals, including his own wife, brother, and mother-in-law, all while skillfully maintaining his respectable facade. When justice, with its customary Victorian slowness, finally caught up with him, he was sentenced to a public hanging in 1856. The spectacle drew a massive crowd, hushed and expectant, likely hoping for a final dramatic confession of guilt or a profound reflection on the beauty he wrought. The doctor, the clinical man of science, had one last bizarre trick up his sleeve. As he was led onto the gallows, his gaze was not on the faces of the condemning crowd or the heaven above, but on the mechanical apparatus designed to end his life. With the detached, professional curiosity of a man inspecting a faulty piece of machinery, Palmer examined the trapdoor beneath his feet. He turned to the executioner, his voice carrying an air of genuine, almost impatient concern, and asked, "Are you sure it's safe?" The irony is almost too perfect, too devastatingly self-aware. A man who built his entire life on deception, the creation of deadly substances, and the complete destruction of safety and trust, spent his last breath questioning the structural integrity and safety standards of his own execution apparatus. It was the ultimate final critique from a man who saw life and death as nothing more than series of flawed, observable mechanisms. Number 7. Mata Hari, the ultimate curtain call. The stage shifts now to the captivating, tragic figure of Mata Hari, a woman whose life was a carefully constructed fantasy. Born Margaretha Zell in the Netherlands, she entirely reinvented herself as an exotic dancer from the East, captivating audiences and seducing powerful men across Europe. She was a master of performance, using glamour, mystery, and sexual power as her primary tools for survival and success. Her performance reached its grim final act when she was convicted of being a double agent, a spy for Germany during the chaotic tumult of World War I, and sentenced to death by a French firing squad. On that cold, unforgiving morning in 1917, she was led out to the execution ground. But in true Mata Hari style, she refused the blindfold, wanting to face her end not as a victim, but as the star of her own tragedy. As the 12 soldiers of the firing squad took aim, she transformed the brutal, bureaucratic execution into a legendary final scene. She reportedly smiled, raised her hand to her lips, a gesture that had seduced countless men across a continent, and blew them a final, defiant kiss, uttering the simple, performance-ending phrase, "Merci, messieurs." Thank you, gentlemen. It was an incredible gesture of pure, unadulterated performance, transforming a horrifying moment of state violence into an unforgettable, glamorous sign-off. She wasn't just accepting her fate, she was directing it. She refused to allow the soldiers or the state to define her final moment. She was the star of her own show, right up to the final, immortalizing curtain fall. Number 8. Emperor Vespasian, mocking divinity. In the complex, power-hungry world of ancient Rome, becoming an emperor came with a fantastic, if a slightly absurd, retirement plan. After you died, you were often granted the status of a god, a deity to be worshipped. Emperor Vespasian, however, was a pragmatic and witty ruler, a man who rose to the highest office from humble, non-aristocratic roots. He was fully aware of the sheer theatrical absurdity of the Roman Senate's tradition of deification. As he lay dying from a fever in 79 A.D., he felt his life slipping away, but instead of the expected anxiety or profound introspection, he saw the humor in his impending promotion to divinity. He was known for his dry wit and his ability to puncture the pomposity of the imperial court. Surrounded by his anxious attendees, he mustered his strength and delivered one of history's greatest deadpan one-liners. It was a joke aimed directly at the heart of Roman imperial grandeur, an ultimate cynical masterpiece. Vae puto Deus fio? Oh dear, I think I'm becoming a god. He was, in essence, mocking the very pomp and circumstance of his own imperial legacy. He was rolling his eyes at his own expected, inevitable ascension to divinity. It was the ultimate mic drop from a leader who understood that the trappings of power were often far sillier than the realities of governing.
Vespasian died as he lived, a humble, witty pragmatist who never took himself or the concept of his own eventual godhood too seriously. Number 9. H.G. Wells, the grumpy visionary. H.G. Wells was one of the titans of literature, a man whose mind operated on a truly cosmic scale. He gave the world the War of the Worlds, the Time Machine, and the Invisible Man, imagining the grand sweep of human and planetary destiny. He was the prophet of science fiction, an intellectual driven by the power of progress and the potential of the distant future. But when his own destiny arrived in 1946, his final thoughts weren't about Martians, time travel, or the cosmos he so expertly chronicled. As he lay dying, surrounded by concerned loved ones waiting for some final philosophical insight, he slipped into a deep coma. The worried faces of his family peered down at him, hoping for a sign of recognition. At one point, he briefly, suddenly, regained consciousness. He looked up at the circle of worried faces surrounding his bed, and in a final, universally relatable moment of exasperation, he grumbled, "Go away! I'm all right." Then, satisfied that he had made his wishes known, he slipped away for good. The grand visionary, the prophet of science fiction, ended his story not with a profound revelation about the future of humanity, but with the simple, utterly human grumpiness of a man who just wants to be left alone and allowed to die in peace. It's a wonderfully humanizing final statement from a mind that so often dwelt among the stars, proving that even a genius can die with a touch of ordinary annoyance. Number 10. Wilson Mizner, The Unsold Experience. Wilson Mizner was a true, magnificent American character, a playwright, a Hollywood screenwriter, a notorious con artist, a gambler, and an all-around scoundrel who lived life with the belief that it was a complex game to be won and cheated at. His wit and sharp one-liners were as legendary as his schemes, making him a fixture in the fast-talking, cynical circles of early 20th century New York and Los Angeles. So, when a priest came to his deathbed in 1933, intending to administer the last rites and save his soul, Misner saw one last opportunity for a clever comeback. The priest said, "I'm sure you want to talk to me," offering a chance for confession and repentance. Misner, ever the strategist and the professional gambler, approached the situation not as a spiritual matter, but with a strange, cynical logic, asking, "Why should I die? I've never done it before." It's a perfect encapsulation of his personality. For a man who had tried every hustle, every vice, and every dangerous situation, death was simply the one experience he hadn't yet checked off his list. It was a final brilliant deflection, treating the Grim Reaper not as a fearsome entity, but as an overrated, untested new fad he wasn't yet sold on. He faced oblivion with the perfect skeptical wit of a man who thought he knew better than the ultimate final authority. If you enjoyed learning how Mata Hari blew a kiss to her executioners and how Dr. Palmer worried about the gallows safety, hit that like button. And make sure you subscribe so you don't miss the rest of this countdown.